Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Paul Mendocha, Dr. Speed Selling, and this is Raging Verbalist number 228, just in case you're keeping track of it. If you're new, glad you're here. If you've been around for a while, welcome back. You can always hit that subscribe, hit that like. If you want to get annoyed, hit the notification. We come up on YouTube and then also on the Facebook group, which is Position to Win Book, and away you go. Quick thing about Raging Verbalist is a topic that pops into my head, something that I feel I'm compelled to talk about, and we do that. Kind of stay as much away from politics as possible, though I have strong opinions. And of course, the person who has the questions puts the pump and the pop and all of that in there is the ever lovely Sandra. Sandra, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I mean, last week I'm a little envious. For those of you who don't know, Sandra is a Omaha person. So does that mean that you get free steaks? Is that how that works?
Unfortunately, no, but I mean,
Uh,
Nebraska beef, it's the best. It's very good.
and they're not even a sponsor, for heaven's sakes. Why aren't you there in Nebraska? So yeah, but the reason for my jealousy is not the fact that she lives in Omaha. That could be enough for some of us, but it's because she went to the Charlie Munger Love Fest, also known as the Berkshire Hathaway meeting last week, and all of that. But that's not what we're here to talk about. But I just thought I would share that with sincere jealousy that she got to go there and hear the Oracle of Omaha, the Seas Candy maven, the drinker of lots of Coca-Cola, Warren Buffett himself. So, all right,
That's
Sandra,
right.
what are we talking? So, did you have a good time?
It was good. It was very good. Had my parents come down, my husband's uncle came into town, and it was delightful as always.
There you go. There you
That's
go.
right.
Well, good. All right. So, what are we talking about today?
All right, so the topic is how do you think? So, what do you mean by learning to learn?
Interestingly enough, in your life, all of your life, is that you have to kind of go through it. And sometimes you meet people who are smart and people who aren't so smart, and people are, it's a variety of things. But what doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen often enough, in my opinion, is that you learn to learn. This is a master skill. It doesn't mean that you have the talent. So if you want to go out and read about quantum physics or how to repair an automatic transmission or do whatever you want to do in life, but learning to learn is really underneath that, which is learning how to actually go through the steps and teach yourself to the best of your ability. That doesn't mean that you do it by yourself, though you can. You can do that. You can go read, you can go watch YouTube videos, you can do whatever you want to do about that. But learning to learn is a systematic method of how you improve your ability to absorb material and correlate material and bring it together. And it's partly what school is supposed to be about, but I think it gets off track because it's based upon rote memory. Can you memorize, well, when was the War of 1812? Surprisingly, some people get that wrong. By the way, hint, it was 1812. So, but you can go do those kind of things. But learning to learn is really all about a master skill of developing learning methodologies and a habit of being able to take any topic, anything that's going on. Example of today is AI. Start building this base of information so you can absorb it and then you can utilize it in your daily life, your business life, whatever you're going to do.
All right, and how did you find out about this?
I was always interested in knowledge, always interested in finding out how things worked, and started going through. And what I discovered is that underneath all of these books, and there's a lot of how-to books, right? How to cook, how to do this or how to do that. And what I decided I want to do is kind of learn the composition of that. How do you put together the steps? How do you go through that? And I started looking at things like decision trees and various graphs and diagrams. And that's just one aspect of it. And I became fascinated about like hierarchies and orders and timelines. And all of that goes back to you want to learn to learn. You want to say, okay, if I want to learn the history of something, then where do I start? Because history, you can keep going back further and further and further. or you can just pick a segment and say, all right, I want to learn something about this one area. And that always involves saying, okay, if I learn to learn, if I actually can improve those skills, then whatever talent I have is then accelerated and moves forward. If you meet somebody who is struggling with any topic, anything that they're working on, usually it's a learn to learn problem where they don't have the capability. Doesn't mean they're not smart, but they don't have the capability of understanding how this gets put together, and therefore they're at a loss.
So how do you figure out how you think?
Well, interesting, as we get into learning to learn, we start developing the various processes, the techniques, the capabilities. Well, it turns out that humans think differently, and they can measure it now with brain scans and see what some person is thinking when they're shown an image or when they're trying to solve a difficult problem and all of those things. But what you want to do is you want to figure out how you personally can think. What is your own style and what is that look like? So the question is you've had to figure that out. Is some of it is what are those things that you do easily or not so easily gives you that hint. And the example that we're going to be talking about today and digging deep in is your thinking style. Now, there isn't a right, perfect way. There's the, you know, introvert. There's the person on the spectrum like Elon Musk who's, inside of his head and has some other issues that going on. Who knows what he's thinking about? Obviously, a really smart guy to be able to cover all those topics. But once you know what that is and how that comes together, it actually frees you up. And what you then can do is follow the path of what Peter Drucker talked about, which is you find out what you're good at. You really find out what you're good at and you focus on it and you don't try to raise the level of your mediocrity. And that's a nice way of saying education spends a lot of time on things that you suck at and not enough on how the best parts of you can be captured and leveraged and all that.
And is there a simple way to figure out how you think?
So I'm just talking theoretically. So here's the simple way to do it, and here's the model that we're going to use, and that is, and we're going to break the world into two big pieces. Now, for all of you who are out there who are now, yelling at your screen or something, saying, "Well, there's always exceptions." Got it. There's always exceptions. None of this stuff works. I'll give you that. I'm left-handed. People will say, because I'll ask people, can you tell me if somebody's left-handed or right-handed just by the way they walk? And they'll say, well, it's a 50-50 shot. And it's not. It's really 92% of the population are right-handed and somewhere between 7% are left-handed, though there are more left-handed people today than before. And then there's the show-offs. That would be the ambidextrous crowd, always trying to show off. But let's go to a different place. And that is, you figure out how you think by what is your methodology of expression. So there are some people who think before they talk. These are people who brood over something. I don't know exactly the right word. I'm concerned about this. And therefore, these are the think to talkers. And those people are out there, and I might say those people, I mean, there's a part of the population that's that way. And then there's the talk to thinkers, which is they have to talk through it. They have to go through it. Now, if you haven't guessed already, if it hasn't clicked in your head that I'm a talk to thinker, the downside of it is that ask me to put something down on a sheet of paper, and that becomes very challenging because, again, I need to talk it out, to think it through, to make it work and make those connections. Whereas those people who think to talk are the opposite of that. In our case, we're looking at opposites, and therefore they have to think their way through before they say anything. So therefore, they are viewed as much more introverted because their concern and inside of their head, the little wheels and they're moving, and I don't know what's inside your head, but there's guys inside my head, working the pumps and spinning the wheels and all that stuff. So how does that manifest itself? So the real question you have to ask yourself is, am I a person who talks to think, right? So you have an idea, have something, and as you're talking to people, it starts working its way through and you go, wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. I didn't really discover this for a long time. And in fact, that's why we're doing the Raging Verbalist, is because this is me doing what I do. And what it was is that I found out that when I would start talking to somebody and we would start working on, let's say, a pitch or working on something, the fastest way for me to do it was to work my way through the material live. Improv is what some people call it, but I don't call that improv. Improv is where you have a prompt and then you react to that prompt. Some ways that's, we do that a little bit with Raging Verbalist, but for the most part, I'm a talk to think kind of person. And that's why for most of my early life, it was very much a struggle because people would say, John, take what you just said and put it down on a sheet of paper. Hard for a talk to thinker to do that. Conversely, if somebody is a think to talker, they will work their way through, write it down, make all of that stuff come together. And then they say, okay, I've now got it. And then they say that. And by the way, you ever want to see an extreme example is that I tried to help a woman do a series of videos for her business. She was a client, and it was really a challenge because for the most part, she was a extreme case of think to talk. Now, if you're sitting there saying to yourself, John, then how in the world did you get this book done? How did you get these things out of your head and make that work? Well, simply it was this, which is I had somebody to help me, which is my co-conspirator, co-author, and business partner, Gabe Batista. And what we did is we sat down and we started working this through and we put it together so I could essentially get this out of my head. Now, that means that we sat down and we would go through topics, we'd write things out. Now, if you're a talk to think person, you need to keep capturing what you're doing over and over and over again. If you're in business, knowing which one of these you are, and you can be successful either way, but that determines how you're going to approach any single problem. So this is why we wrote, most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes, just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it, position to win, is that oftentimes it takes people years to put something together because they're thinking so much before they want to do it perfectly. And I'm here to tell you that what you want to do is you want to first read our book, and therefore you'll know what mistakes people make in the very first 5 minutes. Also, if you want to do a different better way of doing working remotely, remote work for better world's available. By the way, everything's available on Kindle. Also, the Most Businesses Fail is available on Apple iBooks, Barnes & Noble Nook, and available physically. And you can go to positiontowinbook.com, positiontowinbook.com, buy it directly from us, and I will, of course, autograph it. All right. I'm getting ahead of myself, but Sandra, what's next?
All right. So is there a simple way to figure out how others think?
Well, what you'll discover when you're talking to somebody is how they respond to something. If you say something to them, like I have a good friend who's an extreme think to talk person. In fact, he's disarming to people. I've had him in meetings where we've been actually trying to pitch something, and somebody would ask him a question, and all of a sudden there's this super long pause. We're used to how rapid fire people can respond to something, and he'll sit there for a indeterminate amount of time. I mean, I've seen him sit there for several minutes. Now you end up having people fill in the gaps. It's a little bit like if you slow down too much on Southern California freeways, there's always going to be somebody pulling in front of you. So the way to determine where people are at is, in fact, to see how they respond to things and how they work through things. Now, you can develop this back and forth, but what you want to know is how do they deal with the circumstances and situations, and it's all about how quickly they respond. Somebody who is very high verbal, who also is a think to talk person or talk to think person, will in fact jump in and just start going and riffing on things. Now, that can be disconcerting for somebody who is on the other side because they'll say, wait a second, you just said this, how does that fit with that? Well, person who's a talk to thinker has rolled on to that next riff. So always have to coincide, but you can figure it out by how they respond and how they reply.
And how do you apply this in personal relationships?
If you're in a business relationship, if you're on a more of a personal relationship, it does apply, because this gets back to where somebody will say, you never listen to me. So talk to thinkers are terrible at appearing to be listeners. Doesn't mean that they're not. I mean, I've been accused of this myself. I know you'll be shocked to hear that. Damning an omission, right? But what it is that you're thinking and you're bouncing off of everything they say. So what you want to understand in it is that what is that other person, that significant other in some cases, what are they like? What is their style? And if you ever want to actually develop that relationship, what you want to do is slow down and give them space so they can say whatever they want to say and they can think their way through it. I always encourage people who are the think to talkers to write out lists, write things out, because it gives them much greater comfort and it lets them feel more in control and more like they're part of it. And if you have a company and you're sitting there and you're trying to interview people, you want to check and see what their style is and see how they handle these kinds of situations. If you really want to put somebody through the test, I don't even know if federal law permits it. And I just say that a little tongue in cheek, because right now you can't ask anything to somebody. But if you gave them something to read, if they really struggle with it, then they're probably a think to talk person. And the more think to talk, the more inside their head, the more likely it is they're not going to be able to read. And now they're transported back to the second grade, where everybody would stand up, at least when I was going to school, and they would start reading apart until the teacher said, okay, now it goes to Sally and then to Billy. And it'd be amazing to me to watch these regretful faces counting the minutes and the pages, hoping that they wouldn't have to get up and read, because that would be very difficult. So it's a way to know. And in a personal relationship, this is going to tell you the level of frustration, because there's frustration on both sides. And you want to, if somebody's important to you, you want to be able to give them and understand what they are. I mean, if you sit there and you point that finger at them and say, I know what you are, you're probably not going to, that relationship's probably not going to last long. So.
All right. Is this a 50-50 proposition?
And we call it, is it a 50-50 proposition for something very simple and sane, which is just like right-handed people, left-handed people, ambidextrous people, which, by the way, those are the outliers, is that it's really not. There are much greater number of people who have to think before they talk, before they speak, before they do any of these things. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be any more meaningful, but so that is the vast majority. And I don't have good statistics. I don't have empirical data. My own experience is that probably 80-85% of the population, maybe even more, are think to talk people, because that these are the people who say to me, wow, I don't know how you get up in front of a group of people and start talking. And as a mentor of mine, Joe, said, give him a microphone and he's not going to stop. So I would say it's not 50-50. About 85% of the population is, in fact, on the think to talk. And therefore, they're always going to make sure that they're on solid ground. That's the other part, is that there's a risk factor. Anybody who has been been around anybody who's a talk to thinker, you never know what you're going to say, because, well, you never know what you're going to say. Your brain is constantly moving forward. So it's not 50-50. There's a lot more people who think before they talk. The world needs both, but it is definitely weighted in that direction.
And how do you apply this to whomever you're trying to influence?
So when you're going in and you're doing a pitch, depending upon how you are set up, and you're going to do a presentation, you're going to talk through what's going on, you really want to start looking at how they respond to things, so that way you know how to build your story, build your message, to carefully construct it. Thinkers want more food for thought. They want, because if you've ever seen people say, well, that's food for thought, those are usually the thinkers who want to think before they talk. So what we want to do, and since it is a disparity between the two, is the language changes, the messaging gets a slight different bend to it. And because of that, you end up with people who then go, okay, this person really understands me. If they ever think that you're a fast talking, don't care, slickster doing that, you're probably a think to talk. No, you're probably a talk to think. Got to get those straight. You're probably a talk to think person to the extreme, and people who are on the other side will not view you with credibility, will not see you as somebody who's really capable because you are just rolling along and riffing. Also, there's a sense that you are not serious about what you're talking about because you responded so rapidly. So if you are, in fact, in that camp, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you always build in a pause, a delay, a beat, or something, build something in dramatically. So therefore, they think that you're thinking before you say it. Always a challenge. And by the way, if you're on the other side and you are a serious thinker to talk, well, you should write out what you want to say and practice it as one would practice any lines. So you want to make sure that you know what the other side is so you can make sure that you can talk to them the right way.
So how do you bridge the gap between the two?
Starts with awareness, and you have to be aware of who you are and how you're put together. You need to accept what that is. And once you do, you kind of free yourself up. I did not understand this for many years, and I also took it for granted that I would step up in front of an audience and talk to people, that I would go and have something glib or fast to say, or that this would work out. So once you have that self-awareness of who you are, now you can then say, okay, then who are they? How are they put together? And here's the simple mindset. You have to put in more than 100% of the relationship. I know you can't go over 100% in pure terms, but you have to be responsible for both sides of it because you are aware of it. They may not be aware of it. You're not going to make them feel more positive if you point it out because it looks like you're pointing out a defect, by the way. When somebody says, geez, John, do you want some feedback? Usually the answer is no, I don't want really feedback. And if you want to prove this, find your most significant relationship and give somebody some really hard-hitting truths about their personality, and they will not take it as positive. They will take it as, this is all about talking about defects. All you have to do is go see when people go to counselors and it turns to shit. And that's usually why. So you bridge the gap by you making sure that you understand who you are and understanding the severity. And that's the right word, not a bad word. It is just the severity of who you are talking to on the other side. If you get two people who are, talk to thinkers together, they're going to talk to each other, but they're talking past each other a lot. If you have an audience filled with people who are thinkers, this is where it's always fun to go in front of an audience and not know exactly how they're put together. That's why I always try to start off with a couple of things to test and see where the audience is. So it's on you. You have to bridge the gap. And hopefully what this has done is this has opened up your mind to know what your exact personal style is. So are you a person who has to think to talk, or are you a person who has to talk to think? And this is one part of learning to learn, because this will determine how well you communicate, and understand communication is very critical and very key. And with that, I'm John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling. And for myself and the ever lovely Sandra, this has been the Raging Verbalist, number 228. Until next time, hopefully you'll be understanding more of who you are and get out there and go make something happen.